Nadab and Abihu, sons of Aaron, each took his censer. They put fire in them. They laid incense on the fire. They offered it before the Lord. The text says it plainly, unauthorized fire, which he had not commanded them. Fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them. They died before the Lord. This happened on the 8th day. 7 days before, Moses had consecrated Aaron and his 4 sons as priests of Israel. For 7 days they had remained at the entrance of the tent of meeting, exactly as commanded. Blood had been placed on their right earlobes, right thumbs, right big toes. Oil had been sprinkled on their garments. They had eaten the consecrated portions in the holy place. Everything had been done according to the command the Lord gave through Moses. On the 8th day, the inauguration was complete. Aaron had stepped forward that morning to perform his first full set of sacrifices as high priest. He offered a calf as a sin offering for himself, a ram as a burnt offering. Then he offered a goat, a calf, a lamb, an ox, and a ram on behalf of the people. He raised his hands over them and blessed them. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting together, then came out and blessed the people again. The glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. The system had been validated. The altar fire was not ordinary fire. It had come from the presence of the Lord himself. That fire was to be kept burning, never to go out. And it marked the one authorized source for all priestly service involving fire. The boundary between common fire and holy fire had been drawn in flame. Nadab and Abihu were Aaron's 2 eldest sons. They had been on Mount Sinai with Moses, Aaron, and 70 elders of Israel. The book of Exodus records it. They went up the mountain and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. He did not lay his hand on the chief men of Israel. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. Nadab and Abihu had stood closer to the divine than almost anyone in Israel's history. They had seen God and survived. They had eaten and drunk in his presence. They had been consecrated alongside their father and brothers. They wore the priestly garments. And they had access to the tent of meeting, to the altar, to the instruments of worship. They were not outsiders breaking in. They were insiders operating within their assigned domain. Their authority to approach the holy was not in question. What was in question was whether that authority included the freedom to innovate. On this 8th day, immediately after the validating fire, they each took a censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and brought it before the Lord. The text does not say the Lord commanded this. It says the opposite. It was unauthorized fire. The Hebrew term is esh zara, strange fire, foreign fire. Later in Leviticus 16, the text would make explicit that incense fire must be taken from the altar, from the fire the Lord himself had provided. And they acted on their own initiative in the zone where only commanded action was safe. Fire came out from before the Lord. It consumed them. They died before the Lord. The same presence that had just accepted the offerings now rejected the priests. There was no warning, no rebuke, no opportunity to withdraw. The response was immediate and irreversible. Nadab and Abihu fell where they stood in their priestly garments at the entrance to the tent of meeting, in full view of the camp. Moses turned to Aaron and spoke. He did not offer condolence. He quoted what the Lord had said. "Among those who are near me, I will be sanctified, and before all the people, I will be glorified." This was the interpretive key. Nadab and Abihu had been near. Nearness did not grant them freedom. It imposed a stricter standard. On those closest to the holy were held to the highest level of precision. Aaron said nothing. The text records his response in 3 Hebrew words, Vayidam Aharon, and Aaron was silent. Not merely quiet, silent in a way that signals cessation, the end of protest or question. His 2 eldest sons were dead on the ground, and he offered no objection to the explanation Moses gave. The high priest, standing between the dead and the living, between his role as father and his role as mediator, chose institutional submission over personal grief. Moses called for Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Uzziel, Aaron's uncle. These were Levites, men from the broader priestly tribe, but not themselves ordained priests. Moses told them to come forward and carry their cousins away from the front of the sanctuary outside the camp. They did so, although the bodies were still in their priestly tunics when they were removed. Nadab and Abihu were carried out of the camp, away from the tabernacle, away from the altar they had just approached with unauthorized fire. The text does not record mourning rites. It records only removal. Then Moses gave Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, a direct command. Do not let your hair hang loose. Do not tear your clothes. If you do, you will die, and wrath will come upon all the congregation. The warning was explicit. Priestly mourning behavior was not merely discouraged. It was forbidden under threat of death, and not just their own death. If they mourned visibly, wrath would fall on the entire assembly. The community's safety was now tied to the priest's ability to suppress their grief and remain on duty. "But you may not leave the entrance of the tent of meeting," Moses continued, "because the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you." The rest of Israel could mourn the burning the Lord had kindled, but Aaron, Eleazar, and Ithamar could not. They obeyed. Aaron and his 2 remaining sons stayed at the entrance of the tent. They did not loosen their hair. They did not tear their garments. They remained on duty while their family was carried outside the camp. Then the Lord spoke directly to Aaron. This is rare in Leviticus. Most commands come through Moses, but here, without intermediary, God addressed the high priest. Drink no wine or strong drink, you or your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. The prohibition was absolute, it was permanent, and it was tied to survival. The Lord gave the reason. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean, and you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them through Moses. The priestly task required discernment. That discernment could not function under impairment. The priest's mind had to be clear, his judgment sharp, his adherence to command exact. The placement of this statute immediately after the deaths has led many to infer that Nadab and Abihu were drunk when they brought the unauthorized fire. But the text does not state they were drunk. The prohibition follows the deaths, but whether it explains them or prevents future failure, the statute became permanent. Alcohol and access could never coexist. Nadab and Abihu had no sons. Numbers records this detail twice, in 2 separate genealogies. When the priestly lines are listed, their names appear with the note, "They died before the Lord when they offered unauthorized fire in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children." Eleazar and Ithamar served as priests in their place during the lifetime of Aaron. The future of the priesthood passed entirely through the 2 younger brothers. Eleazar would later become high priest after Aaron's death. His line would dominate the priesthood through Israel's history. The removal of the 2 eldest sons eliminated potential rival lineages before they could form. The costs were distributed widely. Nadab and Abihu paid with their lives and their lineage. Aaron paid with the suppression of his grief and the loss of half his sons. Eleazar and Ithamar inherited a priesthood now operating under heightened scrutiny and additional restrictions. The wine prohibition was declared a statute forever, binding every generation of priests to come. They would carry the permanent burden of distinguishing holy from common, clean from unclean, under the explicit threat that failure in judgment meant death. The congregation of Israel was told explicitly that if the priests mourned improperly, wrath would come upon all of them. Their safety was now visibly dependent on priestly compliance with boundaries that had just been enforced by lethal fire. When priests fail, communities pay. The people had seen the validating fire. Now they had seen the consuming fire. The alternatives that existed in the system were never ambiguous. Nadab and Abihu could have refrained from offering incense until commanded. They could have waited for Aaron as high priest to perform any incense-related rites. They could have used only the fire from the altar, the fire that had just come from the Lord. The instructions Moses had been delivering were detailed and comprehensive. The altar fire had been provided visibly and dramatically. There was no gap in communication, no missing piece of the protocol. What they did instead was treat their access as authorization to innovate. They each took a censer, suggesting they acted in parallel, possibly together. They put fire in the censers from a source other than the altar. They laid incense on that fire. They brought it before the Lord. At no point in the sequence did they operate under a command to do so. Why they did this, the text does not say. It does not speculate about motives. Later interpreters would offer explanations. They were drunk, they were prideful, they sought to outdo their father. But the text refuses these additions. It gives only the act and the response. The silence around motive is itself significant. It suggests that the reason does not matter. What matters is the boundary. Only commanded acts are safe in the presence of the holy. The constraints that prevented alternatives were not external. The Philistines were not attacking. There was no famine forcing shortcuts. The tabernacle was fully provisioned, the priesthood fully consecrated, the sacrificial system operational and validated. The constraint was internal to the sacred order itself. Holiness does not negotiate. The Lord had said, "She among those who are near me, I will be sanctified." That principle was non-negotiable, and when they acted outside command in that nearness, the response was immediate. Later that same day, another incident tested the boundaries. Moses discovered that the goat of the sin offering had been burned up rather than eaten by the priests in the holy place, as commanded. He was angry. He confronted Eleazar and Ithamar. Aaron intervened. He explained that they had offered the sacrifices before the Lord that day, but such things as these have happened to me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been acceptable in the sight of the Lord? He asked. Moses heard this and was satisfied. The exchange reveals something crucial. Even within a framework of strict command, there remained narrow room for priestly interpretation. But that room was not assumed. It had to be articulated, defended, and submitted to Moses for approval. Aaron did not simply act and expect his authority to cover the decision. He explained his reasoning and asked whether it would have been acceptable. The system could accommodate situational discernment, but only under intense scrutiny and only when the priest's rationale aligned with the logic of sanctification. This procedural dispute, occurring hours after the deaths, shows the priesthood operating under a tightened framework. Eleazar and Ithamar were already navigating the new reality. Every decision was now subject to review. Every deviation from expected procedure had to be justified, and the memory of their brother's consumption by divine fire hung over every act of service. The people had watched the fire come down and consume the offerings. They had shouted, they had fallen on their faces. Now they watched as two priests were carried out of the camp in their tunics. The congregation that had witnessed validation now witnessed judgment. The God who accepts sacrifice by fire will also judge priests by fire. The tabernacle was not a neutral space. It was the dwelling place of the Holy One of Israel, a God who had declared, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." Holiness was not an abstract quality. It was an active boundary, enforced in real time. The rituals Moses had been given on the mountain were not suggestions. They were the terms of survival in the presence of the divine. Step outside them, and the presence that should sustain you will end you. Generations later, when the genealogies were compiled, Nadab and Abihu's names would appear with the same notation: died before the Lord, offered unauthorized fire had no children. The memory was fixed. The warning was permanent. In every listing of Aaron's sons, the two eldest were marked by their manner of death and by their lack of descendants. The priesthood remembered them not as pioneers or tragic victims, but as boundary markers. They defined the edge of permissible action by crossing it and being consumed. The bodies were carried outside the camp. The priesthood continued with 2 sons instead of 4. The statute stood forever. No wine, no strong drink, when you enter the tent of meeting, lest you die. The altar fire never went out. But 2 priests did, and every priest who followed carried their names as a warning. Nearness is not safety. Access is not authorization. And the fire that validates the system will also consume presumption the moment it appears.